We're working with Castor on desensitizing to some consistent touch. So we hadn't really done this before, so I was a little surprised when I actually did it and he did not understand it. So he definitely did not generalize it with petting. So you'll see that in a second. But I asked him to move over here because he was also struggling with standing facing the fence. He really wanted to stand parallel, so I just had to yield his hindquarters over and work on that. But we're just going to start off by doing a little bit of a review. We're just going to do some review with the halter, and then we'll work on some other stuff. So he's gotten better. He definitely wants to reach out and touch the halter a lot more. He's not as fearful. There's definitely some fear still in there, but he is looking better. There we go. He's putting his nose in there, and it's a little bit hard to see from this angle because I had moved the camera to this other side versus just setting it on one of those posts on the either side of the gate. So it's a little bit hard to see, but he is making progress, so I thought it was important to show that. He's looking away here. That's important. He's giving me some calming signals here. He looked to the left, and then he looked to the right. Look back to the left. So that's important to note and just to see. I'm not going to necessarily do anything about it. I like this though. He's also touching and targeting the halter. So that's what I'm going to say. Like, not going to necessarily do anything about those right now. I'm going to take them into consideration. That was really nice. But I'm not going to necessarily go back steps yet. I'm going to notice that, okay, he's probably a little bit worried about it, but he's also reaching out and participating, so I don't want to go too far. But I think at this point, he doesn't really need to go back because I like that where he's reaching out his nose, and I can get the halter most of the way on. I'm just not, so that's good. I've seen his calming signals, and I've noticed he's not completely relaxed, so I'm not going further and just like going and playing it over his ears and tying it. That was very nice. I like all of that. So I like this stuff. He's being pretty interested, but another thing is he's not bringing his feet to the halter. He's bringing his nose to the halter. So that's another thing. That's not a calming signal. It's just interesting because when they're a little bit worried about something, they're gonna stretch their neck out so then their feet are away and then they can escape. So it's just another way of him showing me that he's not super sure about it. I'm trying to get him to back up. He was a little jumpy there. Probably could have cued him to do that a little bit smoother and easier because he is worried about the halter, so I don't want to add any more tension into this exercise. So again, yeah, I should have asked that a little bit slower, maybe use the target, because now I'm just scaring him at this point because he's already worried about the halter, and I wanted to just get him in position, but instead I asked him to with too much energy, and then it just worried him, and now he's like, oh, I'm not so sure, and you could see that by that time he's kind of leaning back with his head. So that was my error in putting too much pressure on, using too much to cue with. That was good. But I mean, it's good that I'm not asking for a lot, but I shouldn't have asked him to back up that much. Could have used a target, gently asked him to back, get into position, or even with my hand cue, he could have just nicely, gently backed up. So, and that's what the protective contact is there to do, is give me that barrier so like I don't have to use those harsher, like a lot of energy or even putting pressure on him to get him out of my space, because if I was in with him, there might be times when I have to do that, and then those times might be when I'm trying to work on this, like when I'm trying to work on the halter here, which is something he's kind of fearful of, and then it's just bad timing, and then it kind of gets attached, those negative emotions and the fear gets attached to the halter more, and it kind of works against myself. So that's another reason for the positive, or for the protective contact. So, but he looks like he's settled here, so we get a little bit further there. That was good. He's a little worried, wanted to pull his head back a little bit because it kind of, the halter is a little stiffer and it kind of catches a little bit. It's not grabbing their face, but versus like a rope halter, it feels different. So, but he's still participating, so we like that. He's bringing his nose, he's standing nicely. Let me put that crown piece up over his ears. This looks a lot better. But it was important to see and like watch me work through because it's not perfect, but it, when is it? So you can just kind of see what I need to work on, things that might be helpful. This looks really good. I like that. He was nice and still. He didn't really move his head a lot. He's not pulling away. So that was nice. And I like to kind of do it from the side here because then I'm already in protected contact, so I'm already out of the way, but he can just get used to that and get used to having things go up over his eyes and over his ears. And then you'll see later on, I'll keep the crown piece like tied. That was really nice. And just kind of slip it over his ears because I'm lazy and I do that with all my halters. But with the Mustangs, they had to be specifically trained for that to happen because it's different than reaching your arm around their neck and like grabbing the halter. So it was kind of a hybrid between the two. So he can do both ways of haltering. So that looks awesome. That looks perfect. So yeah, he started a little weird, little not so sure, but he ended really strong right here. So that looks awesome compared to his last I don't even know, 3 or 4 videos where he's like just completely unsure of the leather halter and was not having any part of it. This looks really, really great. So it just there was also there's probably a few other or at least half other sessions where I didn't film and we did the same exact thing. So it did take more time than I showed on film, but it's the same thing over and over, so it's kind of boring. But within a few weeks, he was much more confident with the leather halter, so it worked out well. And right, like now, like he sees a halter, any kind of halter, he wants to show his face in it. So it's definitely worth the time it takes to train for sure. Because now he's generalizing. Now he thinks halters are great, thinks bridles are great. Like he sees one, he wants to put his face in it, and he's got that positive emotion with those things. So now I don't have to constantly train it. So it works out really well. But this was just the steps to get there, and that I like that part where he's participating. He's putting his head out, and then I'm just kind of wiggling it around and then just kind of holding it. Those are my like interim steps before I actually like put it on there. And with this halter specifically, it came with a off the track thoroughbred, and um I like it because it's leather, obviously, so it's safe. So I, oh, that was nice. He's putting it on again. So if for some reason, I put it on and I can't get it off Castor, it's not the end of the world because if he got tangled in something, it's just going to break off. So I strategically did that so he's not running around with a nylon halter on that's not going to break, or a rope halter that would be bad. I did train with that in the beginning because it was much, much easier and it was more of a I need to move him right now situation, which isn't always the best situation. But he was also in a small pen, so I could get him again and take it off if necessary. So that's something you need to pay attention to. But anyways, part of putting the halter on and off is the buckle on this halter is hard to get off. It's not necessarily like, oh my gosh, it's going to take me 5 minutes to get this buckle. It takes a second longer because you have to kind of pull it in a different way, but it might scare him. So I'm really trying to prepare him for that buckle because I already know this about the halter. So it's just older and I think the buckle's bent, so it takes you a minute to get it off. So being prepared with your training plan is really important. So I'm spending that extra time getting him used to, okay, he stands here while I move it around in my hands versus he holds for a second and then I go ahead and just buckle it, and then when I go to unbuckle it, it takes me a minute and he gets scared. So it's just important to have all those all that pre-planning done and kind of knowing what you're getting into, which sometimes you can't do, but try to know as many details as you can because it'll help you out. But now we're just going to review some petting here. And then he's really good with the petting. He's progressed pretty systematically with that. Like with one hand all the way over his body, with 2 hands all over his body. He did really, really well with that. It's the one hand resting on him where he didn't do great at, and it was interesting to show the difference. So we'll see that part. My hand on his withers, he's all twitching, and I was like, oh, something is weird here because he was being a little weird and wanting to, like, he'll stand nicely and let me pet him most of the time, but he'd be a little weird about moving his hips sometimes, and I'm thinking he's just confused. But I think there's a little bit in there of still a little bit of fear in there. So I want to go back and make sure that he's cool. Like I'm putting my hand like on his face, on his neck here, and making sure he's okay with that touch, like that constant, consistent touch, before I work my way back down. I think that's the little piece that I was missing before that he didn't really generalize, and that's why he wants to swing his hips a little bit. I think it also has to do a little bit with confusion. Same thing, or he thinks he's supposed to come, and I did teach him the hindquarter yield, so I think all of that kind of played together. But I think this was a big piece of it and trying to fix it. I really don't know why I'm staying so long with my hand on his neck. I probably should have just held it for a couple seconds, clicked while it was on there, and he was relaxed, and then fed. But I'm still definitely deep in the experimental phase, which I probably always am, but more so than usual here. But it was a really interesting reaction I got when I put my hand on his withers. Like here, he's pretty good. So anything in front of the shoulder, he seems like he's great with. And that's where I did all of that targeting too. He would target my hand everywhere up until his shoulder. Like he would target his shoulder to me and nothing past that. He's good with his chest. So I'm just kind of checking all my bases here and making sure like where is the issue at. And it's really right behind his withers and his back and then anything past that. So, but it was an interesting thing to find. And I don't think I necessarily had that problem with Atlas. So he must have generalized a little bit better, but it's each horse is different, so it kind of depends. But I thought it was an interesting thing because it was so much different with Castor. And I like that, where that was the second time I put my hand on his withers, and he was like, oh, okay, just constant hand pressure is fine. So it was interesting. I learned definitely a lot from Mustangs. This was one of the main things. See right there? He's like, oh, don't like that. And then as soon as he stopped, I took it off. So I am doing negative reinforcement there. I am mixing a lot. I'm trying to figure out what works the best for him. So I could have just barely touched, clicked, and fed. That would have also worked. Here, I'm waiting until he's done flinching, clicked, and fed. So it did work in this situation. It wouldn't have worked if he was like escalating from that and walking away, because at that point, there's nothing I can do because I'm on the other side. So he's like twitching, he's kind of dipping his withers, and he kind of stepped with that inside hind leg, like he might want to walk or scoot his butt away or something. So be careful with that. Notice that because you might have to just lightly put your hand there for a second and build up duration from there, especially when you're in protective contact, because he might have just left. So he didn't in this situation. So I was able to continue to like mix and wait until he was relaxed and then give him a treat. But that is an important part of it if you're going to do this or you have similar problems and stuff. And he was just like not taking any of the hay here either. So that's why a bunch of it's on the ground. Eventually I do move on and he gets like alfalfa slash Timothy pellets, like the mix. So, and then now he's just eating like chopped hay. He works really good for that. He gets a little too excited for the Timothy and alfalfa mix. See, we got some wither movement there still. And I'm just gonna wait for him and then go ahead and give him some hay. So, but you could tell he's a little bit like he's a little bit worried about my hand on him, and he's not being reinforced enough because this hay he's like, I'm not, he's not. It's not reinforcing enough for him. So I need to find something more reinforcing for him at this point. That looks really nice. I should have taken my hand off much earlier because he was standing there that whole time until a second ago where he twitched. So I should have taken it off much sooner. But I am definitely seeing an improvement, and it's only been a couple minutes. So that is also good. Good. Yep, that was a much better timing wise because I was kind of struggling with him, and you'll see I fast forwarded through the clip a little bit because it was a little long, where I was petting him and he was just like, and he'd keep moving. So I was like, why is it not sticking? And I think this is part of it. So, and the other things that I mentioned earlier, but this looks good. Again, that was a little long, but he's getting it. He's understanding this process. So we'll take that. So I went and got him a different flake of hay, something, I think I might have had different bales or something, but something a little bit more rewarding for him or just a different piece. And then I moved my camera back so we can kind of see the whole picture a little bit. And I was worried that my body was blocking the camera, which it wasn't. We could see from that earlier, but that's all that was is I'm probably doing it worse now because now you can't see it, but um, it's the same day, same session. So same thing. We're just kind of working on that. I probably shouldn't have stayed as long as I did on the withers. I should have moved toward his back. But that is a problem that I have with everything is I stay too long and I'm like perfectionist in that sense. And I'm like, I want to get this perfect when I should have just moved on and then we could have worked on it while also working on other things. If that makes sense. So like I could have continued down his back and then later on I could have been grooming him and just placed my hand there or been working on the saddle pad and worked on that. So I could have worked on it in other things instead of like drilling this one part. And I need to work on that myself because I do that too much. But it is good to see and and learn from because I still do this and I watch this video. So like still something that I need to work on. Okay, so now I'm a little bit further behind his withers. It's a little bit hard to see because I'm blocking it with my body just kind of lined up like that. But I'm a little bit, there we go. Yep, a little bit further behind, probably like a hand's width behind the withers. And he's gotten it. He hasn't really been doing a lot of flinching. So he's understanding that it's the touch all over. So that is good. I mean, it also could be like something's hurting him, but I hadn't noticed anything else. So I'm, taking it within the context. Nothing else was off with him. So I think it's just my hand being there. He was like, oh gosh, that's weird. Because I hadn't been holding my hand there. I had just been petting him and taking it off, like stroking him. So I think that's all it was. But I did look at other things. He was moving fine, eating fine. He lay down and roll and all that stuff fine. So um, overall, he seemed fine. It was just the touch itself that he was not comfortable with. So same thing. That looked really nice. And I'm just going to do that all the way to the hindquarters. I didn't do that all in this session, but that is the whole process. And I'm going to do the same thing on the other side too. So I don't know if I'm going to show that in a later video or not. I might if there's something good in there that it's good to see versus me just describing it, but it's that same process all the way to his hindquarters, to his tail, and then on the same side, same process, and just make sure he's good with the petting and with having my hand just resting on him.